Jazz Loft.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the old fire station. Hope everyone had a delicious lunch at the Festival Cafe. And if you didn't, you can go and check it out after. We are back for a solid afternoon of fiction, poetry, exciting writers here in the old fire station. I'm going to hand you over in a second to the host of this session. But before we begin, I just want to say something that's very exciting about this particular session is, for a long time, the narrative has been that to be a successful writer from the Caribbean, you have to leave, right? So, we have a long history of this. Our writers have to go somewhere else. This year is the Sam Selvon centenary. We've got a Selvon exhibition up in the Rotunda. His story was he left to go to London. But something that excites me and encourages me very much is that in this last generation of writers, we've got writers who are living here at home, working here at home, very much grounded at home, haven't gone anywhere, and they're still getting their books internationally published. And that includes all three of the writers here on stage this afternoon. I think that deserves a round of applause. It means that our writers are writing as well as anybody anywhere else in the world. It also means that publishers are finally waking up to the fact that there is amazing writing talent living at home in the Caribbean. So maybe we're getting to the point where you can live at home, live in the tropics, live in the heat, not have to go in the cold, and still have a completely successful career as a writer. So I'm going to hand you over now to Alaki Pilgrim, right beside me, who's going to host this session. Alaki, as many of you must know, is an author from Trinidad and Tobago. Just last year published her book Zoe and the Forest of Secrets, which is a book for young readers, a children's book, been extremely successful. She's in the Children's Festival this year, so adults can come to the children's events in case you didn't know. So she's going to introduce the other two, hand over to you, and we're going to have an amazing afternoon of stories from these two amazing writers on stage. So please welcome Alaki.
Okay, y'all, it's a real honor for me to be facilitating this conversation, and I hope it will be a conversation including you. So start thinking of your questions, those of you who've read the books, and there will be time for questions, more than ample time. So we have today with us Sharma Taylor, who's the author of What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You. And we also have Sherry Jones, who's the author of How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Now, Sharma and Sherry are actually both attorneys living in Barbados, but Sharma is from the great island of Jamaica. I don't want, Jamaicans to kick her out. She's just staying in Barbados. She goes back and forth. Okay, so Sharma is a Jamaican writer and attorney. She holds a PhD from the Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and has won numerous prizes and been shortlisted for numerous prizes for her writing, including the Wasafiri Prize, the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, the Elizabeth Nunes Award, and many others. Now, her novel, I just want to tell you a little bit about each book, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You. At 18 years old, Dinah, a Jamaican maid, gave away her baby son to the Steeles, a rich American couple she worked for before they left Jamaica. They never returned. She never forgot him. 18 years later, a young man, Apollo, comes from the US to Kingston. From the moment she sees him, Dinah never doubts that this is her son. What happens next will make everyone question what they know and where they belong. So this story combines and brings out the criminal underworld in Jamaica, dance halls, corrupt politics, but at the heart of it is a mother's love for her son. Now, Sherry's book, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Sherry, as I said, is also an attorney from Barbados and living in Barbados. She won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. She's won numerous awards for her writing. She has been published previously by People Tree Press for her collection of short stories, The Burning Bush Woman. And her debut novel, Just Like Sharma's, was published to great acclaim in the US and the UK, and was actually a Good Morning America Book Club pick that month, and on many, many most anticipated fiction lists. Now, about the book itself, in How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House in Baxter's Beach, Barbados, Lala's grandmother, Wilma, tells this story of the one-armed sister. And it's a cautionary tale about what happens to girls who disobey their mothers and go into the Baxter's tunnels. When she's grown, Lala lives on the beach with her abusive husband, Aidan, who is a man with endless charisma who also engages in criminal activity. His thwarted burglary at the beach home of Peter and Mira Wallen sets off a chain of events with terrible consequences. So we have a new mother, Lala, whose baby is found lifeless on the beach. We have Peter Wallen, whose life is ended by gun violence. And we have Mira Wallen, his wife, a woman torn between two worlds, who's incapacitated by grief. We have the two men, Aidan and one of his best friends, Tone, who are driven into the tunnels and who attempt a crime that will risk their freedom and their lives. So you can tell these books are full of action, full of excitement. Let's get into a short reading from both of the authors now.
Hello, everyone. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be reading from chapter 25 of my novel, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. It's my favorite chapter, and I'll read a short extract for you. How do you learn to love a man? You struggle to keep up with Tone through the rickety stalls of galvanized and plywood from which vendors hawk fried fish and fish cakes and American hot dogs in fat yellow rolls of bread. Tone pays no mind to your rounded belly, and even less to the glimmer of Chinky's rough-set diamond in a gold band that used to be part of a chain Aidan stole. No, Tone walks apace through the narrow alleys and roadways towards Baxter's village and the beach and the house you have recently moved into with your husband, and he hardly looks behind him to make sure that you are keeping up. And though you are nearly panting from the effort of staying a few paces behind him, you keep your eyes on your orange booties, marching one in front of the other, being splattered by soft mud and scraped by rough pebbles and rocks and wood. When he takes you through an alley so narrow that a 2-foot stone blocks the path, you have a dilemma. You don't have a choice but to climb over this stone, but you can't because the miniskirt will not allow your legs to lift that high. And though you had resolved, when he disappeared years before, that you would never again call this boy in such a way that he can think you need him, you start to stumble, and you have to take your eyes off the booties, and you have to call this name you cannot forget. Robert, how do you learn to love a man? You might think you learn by speaking because of the warmth that fills your chest and escapes your lips when Tone helps you up and over the rock. When he asks you about your husband, about how you met him, about the day you married him, and the day you moved into his house on the beach, you talk and your body fills with heat. This warmth is the proof of your love, you consider, and speaking of it makes it stronger. It is to this love for your husband that you credit the heating in your chest when you speak, and not the memory of other days with this boy who is not your husband, whose arms hug your own and heave you upward over the obstacle and onto the part where the path is again clear. The rain comes and the heat does not fizzle, and this boy tells you that there's an entrance to the tunnels just close by this path you are on. Do you remember the tunnels? And the warmth leaves your chest and fans up across your face and down. And perhaps love is indeed obedience, because when he asks you if you would like to try to run the rest of the way to Aiden's house on the beach, or to follow him to that entrance, you tell this boy, yes, yes, you would like to follow him to that entrance. You would like to shelter in those tunnels. But of course, you do not only shelter in those tunnels. You do not only listen to the rain and wait for it to end. In those tunnels, you understand that you do not learn to love a man, because for the right man, there is no need for the learning. The love is the most natural thing in the world. You understand that if you must learn to love a man, he is probably not the man you should be loving. And this is the reason you shriek your joy, so that it echoes through these small, dark passageways and fills them with light. This knowledge, you tell yourself, and not the hands and the tongue and the thighs of tone beneath you on the ground in these tunnels. This is why you're singing. This truth that only the girls who dare to enter the tunnels are able to find out. Thank you.
When I was 18, Leroy, my worthless boyfriend from all-age school, wrestled with me one evening in the cane field. I still had on my shorts and panty, so it's pure shock when my period stopped. 9 months later, here comes a cotton hair boy pitney, hair picky like mine, skin smooth like Leroy, head just as big, face wide and beautiful. Me never see eyelashes so long yet, lips so fine and full, and them little fingernails so pink and perfect. Long fingers like mama. A strong, firm nose like him know him going to be one important man. Mama nearly get epileptic fix when me tell her I'm pregnant. It's just 2 years I in the job with the Steels, an expat couple who work for the US Embassy in Kingston. I never know what Mr. Steele do, but at the embassy, everybody call him Mr. Steele, so I know him is a big shot. Them same work for the CIA, but I don't know if it's true. People say Steele wasn't even them real name. That is a false identity, and them in Jamaica to spy on we, cause Uncle Sam suspect we're getting too friendly with Fidel Castro in Cuba, and Americans never want any more communism in them backyard. Let him get your US visa, Mama used to say, but me never ask, and the Steels never offer. Mr. Steele, white, pale like a full moon. Mrs. Steele was a black woman, but much lighter than Mama. Her scars smell like lavender, and she wear plenty bangle that look like them about to drop off her hand. She used to dye her hair red. When it growing out, the roots used to be black. Red hair usually drop across her eyes, so it's not easy to see her small face. She let me borrow her books, and I read them when I finish work early. That's poetry from Shelley, she'd say, or Lord Byron. Me study poetry I never understand and talk it out loud. The recitals seem to please her. That woman filling up your head with words, Mama used to say, sucking her teeth. You can't eat them, fool girl. Me picture Mrs. Steele in a white apron, serving plump, juicy words on a plate, and I laugh. Some evenings, Mrs. Steele tell me about them years in Africa. postings in places I never hear about yet, but she show me on a map. She teach literature at universities there, and I watch her eyes turn like glass, like she in a trance. Such beautiful people, she said, sweet little babies, and then she'd get quiet. The Steeles never had any children, although me used to hear Mrs. Steele telling her friends, whenever them come over to the house with them pitney, how much she did want a baby of her own. I'm surprised when they said they're having what Mrs. Steele called a baby shower for me. The party did dead. Between me acting like me want to be there, the 2 sweet drinks Mrs. Steele made, the balloons losing air, the stale biscuits, and the crush up happy delivery sign across the hallway. It was just the 4 of them. 4 of we, Mama, me, them. Mama wear her only good dress, a stiff white-colored black shift that make her look like all the blood suck out of her face. The Steeles, they wear some loose trousers and floral tops Mrs. Steele said them buy in Ethiopia. I was in distress since Leroy take up with a brownie named Shelley and moved to Montego Bay. Mama says she's not surprised. Leroy wouldn't want a black girl like me. During the baby shower, I still reeling with shock, sick from the baby or the breakup or the 2 of them together. I couldn't stop wriggling the chair. So you have no support, Mrs. Steele say. I never know to answer, so I look over at Mama drinking her Darjeeling tea. We could solve your problem, Mrs. Steele, voice shaky bad. She looked on her husband, who did stand up beside the glass window, and all of a sudden, Mrs. Steele looking hard on something outside. She rubbed her throat with her fingers and cocked her head to one side. Then she said, "You've worked for us for a long time. So I know, you know, I'd be a good mother. I always wanted my own child." I wondering what that have to do with me. Same time, she come out and spell it out plain. How about we adopt the baby when it's born? After all, you can't possibly look after it. I promise I'll take good care of it. I mean the child. Think what it'd be like for them growing up in a big house like this. She moved her arms around the room like she's swimming in the middle of the ocean doing a backstroke. Mama cup bang in the saucer. She pinch and push out her lips them till them look gray. Think about it, Dinah. What mother doesn't want the best for her child? Mrs. Steele float to the window and hold on to her husband's hand. What can you give the baby that we can't? Her words sting me. I just was thinking we could give my child myself. Before I get to ask why that not good enough, Mama blurt out. What do you want with our baby? You don't think it's puss picnic that people are give out in a cardboard box? No, Mr. Steele trying to calm down Mama while Mrs. Steele bury her face in his chest. I not going to allow it. You don't think that causing a rich is okay to do as an alike? Mama eyes on fire. You're taking this the wrong way. We want to help, Mr. Steele say. You mean help yourself to our picnic? I don't remember all what happened next, except Mama storm out with me behind her. That night, while me rubbing my swollen belly, all I thinking upon is Leroy. My back ache, the shadows from the home sweet home kerosene lamp dance like somebody with the devil inside them, and Mama's snoring sound like a horse cat clearing its throat beside me. Then I thinking about my son. Somehow, me know it was a boy, and picturing him here next to me in the bed. I could see him wiggling his little arms and legs and looking around this tiny room. And for the first time, me feel like we in prison, and me know I had to get him out before the walls fall down on all of we. Thank you.
You'll see why I'm excited to facilitate this discussion, right? So, my ladies, tell me, the books, for those who haven't read them yet, and for those who have, are actually told from many different perspectives. Why was that so important to each of you?
Okay, I'll start. So for me, there were 2 reasons that I told this story from so many perspectives. The first is because I believe that to be a feature of our storytelling tradition in the Caribbean. So, you know, if I'm telling the story of my next door neighbor, I can say, you know, that man that come a moving down the road, you remember the day he come in when the wife was there signing up next to you and she ain't speak to nobody? Well, I hear that she's a university professor and this is what she, you understand? So in order to tell you the story of my neighbors and what happened, I have to tell you a number of stories. And where all those stories interlock is perhaps the true story. So that's the first reason. The second is a little different. What I wanted was for readers to experience a little of the instability, dissociation that Lala, as a victim of violence, would feel. And for me, a linear story or approaching this story in a linear way would not have accomplished that. I wanted the floor of this story to be a little unsteady under the feet of the reader to assist with that deeper understanding of Lala and what she goes through in the novel.
Well, before I answer your question, I have to give honor to the Bocas Lit Fest organizers, workers, sponsors, because in a real sense, this book is a Bocas baby. In 2019, I won the Johnson and Amoya Chung Prize. Well, it was still just the first chapter and an outline. And the funding from Bocas allowed me to go to Arvon in the UK and to finish it. So in truth, this book is a Bocas book. And I just want to honor Bocas for what they've done for writers, because without Bocas, I would not be holding this book. So I just want to give honor to everybody who supports Bocas. So that's the first thing I had to say. It would be remiss of me not to. And also, I want to say thanks to everybody being here. It's like so surreal, like being here and having people come listen. Because last time I was here in 2019, before COVID, I was in the audience and now I'm like on stage and this is so crazy. Like, how did this happen? Anyway, so to answer the question, Sherry already gave you the answer, so I'm just going to underscore sign. Agree. I concur.
Real smooth, Sharma, real smooth. Well, that's interesting. You brought up something about interconnectedness, and I do have questions concerning that. Now, what I found fascinating about the violence in the books, right, because it's layered violence, is how you all draw the interconnections between the various forms of violence. And I wanted to ask, it's a little different for both books, so I'll ask it separately. Sharma, for you, I saw you making those links between what we would consider personal, familial, domestic, community violence, criminal violence, to political violence, and even geopolitical, right? Bringing in the Americans and how they responded to the Manley regime and destabilized the Manley regime. Why was that, making that kind of upward, downward link important to you?
I must say, it's not something I consciously thought about in the process of writing, right? I'm just telling a story. It's just stepping back out of it. I'm realizing, there are those connections, you know? But the fact of the matter is that there is, especially the fact that this book is set in the mid-1980s, and if you understand history of Jamaica and what we would have went through, if I'm choosing to write about this period, which is a period in which I grew up, I could not avoid the whole issue of violence. And, you know, the fact of how we were destabilized from an economic perspective has its implications in how, you know, violence and crime, because people may not realize that garrison communities that are ruled by dons, including British in this book, were aligned with political parties, you know, and the reason why a lot of them today, you know, vote along political lines is because they were initially set up that way. And those gangs would have said, you know what, after the politicians may not give me as much money as I want, they go into the business of the drugs and the guns and things that persist even today. And for families and people that live in those communities like Dinah, you know, you can't avoid having that implication in your own family, because at a certain point the boys have to join the gang, or, you know, you have to leave the community. The girls, you know, get broken in, quote unquote, in terms of sexual violence with the dons, and that also happens to Regina in the story, and that shatters families. That shatters, you know, not just individual psyches, but what does it mean for family when, you know, you have to see your brother going out and grabbing a gun and your sister being violated in all these ways? And, you know, so I wanted to really explore that in this work because it is a reality for people in the country, right?
And my twist on that question for you, Cherie, is I felt like class politics in Barbados and how that relates to color and race as distinct things, and class, color, race, all as distinct, even though interconnected. I felt like you really unpeeled layers of that in Bajan society for us. If you could talk a little bit about Mira and her lineage and why that was important to you to go into just the intricacies of how those things are connected but also different.
Okay, so I have to say, for me, it was a similar process. So this story is also set in the mid-1980s. And for me, I like to think of that period as the time when, as a country, we were now going into adulthood. What was interesting about that for me was how that time period reflected the way that we thought about ourselves. So as it relates to color, I mean, colorism was and remains an issue in Barbados. So Mira Whalen is a member of the Red Leg community in Barbados. And I hadn't come across very many, if any actually, no novels for sure, that spoke about that community. Now, the so-called Red Leg community in Barbados is a community of, Caucasian appearance, the descendants of indentured labor, but currently a very poor community. And what was interesting for me to look at was, in the mid-1980s in Barbados, you could go into Cave Shepherd, our main department store, and you, as an Afro-Caribbean person, a dark skin tone, could go to the counter for service and find that you really weren't attended to. You didn't feel welcome. And if you had somebody of a different appearance, a Caucasian, a lighter appearance, the response would be different. And usually that was because of the general feeling or the general attitude that linked lighter color to higher class, to more financial capacity, and so on. It was just interesting for me to explore that in the story. One, because it was a reality at that time. I like to talk about this case, labor case in Barbados from that period, where a black employee of a hotel on the island was dismissed for having her hair in braids. Now, ironically, all around the hotel, you'd have local women on the beach braiding hair for tourists. And I talk about that in the book. And, I was reading a newspaper article about it just the other day. And, the writer of that article noted that he spoke to guests of the hotel, and they said, but we ain't got no problem. Her hair is beautiful, and then you had the management of the hotel saying, not here. That's not acceptable. So I wanted to explore the extent to which, at the time in which the novel is set, race, class, color intersected, and what it meant for us as a people then, and perhaps trace a little bit of how we might have changed now, and how that might have influenced who we are today as a people.
Interesting. And what I found interesting in both novels is how that pans out, the hierarchies and how they pan out aren't expected sometimes, because Mira has this interesting encounter where she goes into a grocery or somewhere for help,
yes.
Right? And at first they look at her and they think, okay, white presenting, yes. She must have some money, let's give her some respect. And then when they realize she's a local poor white, they're like, oh, go along. Don't waste our time. Yes. So that's interesting too. And then what's interesting in your novel, Sharma, is we have, the mom, Apollo's mom, we don't know who exactly his mom is, but his mom, his named mom, is a black woman, right? But from the U.S. and from a wealthy, originally U.S. family in the southern U.S. And so her encounters now with different kinds of blackness in Jamaica was very interesting, and his encounters and his expectations versus what he actually found.
Yes. Yeah, because in the novel, he grows up with a white stepfather and an African American mother in America, but he never quite fit in the white society. The same neighborhood where he lives. When he's walking on the street, people old ladies holding onto their bags, and he's like, my sneakers cost more than that bag. Like, I'm not interested in it. But it's sort of him not knowing who he was as a black man, and that's one of the themes in the novel. He doesn't know how to be a black man because Celeste has told him that his father died in a car crash when he was a baby, his biological father. So he doesn't know what it means to be black, as a black man. And coming to Jamaica for him represents, okay, here's my opportunity to see a country run by black people. In one scene, his stepfather is driving in Jamaica, and the policeman is there, and he has to show respect to that black policeman. And people on the street kind of just harass him, and he can't say anything, and Apollo kind of gets tickled by this, because where he's from, he's the odd man out. He's the one at the dinner parties when he's trotted out to his stepdad's family as, okay, here's our black son, and it makes them feel like they're connected to blackness. And he kind of goes overboard with the sheikies and like saying what's up my nigga and all these things that make them uncomfortable. But he's trying to find himself, and in Jamaica, unfortunately, he also doesn't fit in with the black people because they see him as this rich foreigner. What you can do for me? Give me some money. And, you can't identify with us. You don't know what it's like to be black in our society and our context. So he's still floating in a way. He's still trying to figure out, okay, I don't belong there, but here, I'm not quite one of them either. But he goes after trying to find himself and identify who he is as a person, and I won't spoil it for you, but during the course of the novel, he comes to some kind of answer.
Well, that's interesting, because I did feel like both novels raised, in a sense, more questions than answers, which is something I like about reading. And I wondered, on that note, let's delve a little deeper into the question of masculinity, because both of you have some interesting quotes in the book. You have a quote where Dinah, I think, is asking Apollo what it is to be a man, and in your book, you have a quote where Lala is asking, how do you love a man? And I wondered if you felt, why did you feel that those questions needed to be asked?
Oh, you want to go?
Okay, I'll start. So for me, part of the, I learn a lot about the world and myself through my writing. I work through things in the writing. Questions for me. One of the big questions I had growing up was, what does it really mean to be a man, and how do you love one? Because for me, in the Caribbean, our performance of gender is something that I found really oppressive as a woman. We had even in the novel, between Tone and Aiden, you would have them saying things like, as man, you can't do that to me. There would be this expression, as man. And I heard that a lot growing up, and I thought, as man. Like, so what is it about having a penis that makes you adopt or become part of a script or a process or performance that I felt that I had no place in? And I think that is one of the questions that I continually return to in my writing. And it was particularly relevant in this story for me, because I do believe that those attitudes and performances of gender and approaches to masculinity and what it means to be a man underpin and contribute to the scourge of violence against women in the Caribbean. And that is really what this story was about. So I couldn't write that story without examining what it is about being a man, and what it means to be a man, and specifically for Lala, what it means to love one. What does that mean? What is that about? So that's why it was important for me to ask the question.
I think for me, it's coming from a very personal place, in the sense that Like many households in the Caribbean, I grew up in a single parent home headed by my mother. She had me and my older brother. My dad lived in England, I come back and forth, but he wasn't in the household in Jamaica. And even though my mom and my brother are close to this day, I think he's a favorite, although neither of them agree. There's a point at which I remember one time as a teens, she said to me like, I just don't know how to raise a boy. I don't know how to make you a man. I don't know how, like, because she was a woman, she felt a sense of, I need a man to show you how to be a man. There's a point at which I just can't do it for you. And it's the same thing in this novel. At one point, Dinah says that to Apollo. It's like, I can love you to a point, but you're going to just have to choose what kind of man, what kind of person you're going to be. You know, my love can only go so far. So I think for me, because I grew up seeing my mom having to father my brother, it was always something that kind of, resonated with me.
Yeah, no, I want to dig into that a little bit more because, again, the interesting thing about the questions more than answers is it opens up rather than closes down, right? So even when it comes to what it is to be a woman, I felt like the women in your novels are all, they don't have answers to that question that might seem in the Caribbean to have more answers given to them, but they seem to be struggling with that question as well. Do you see potential and freedom in the fact that these are kind of questions upon questions, or do you see it more as a struggle? Do you see it more linked to trauma, or maybe both?
Well, I mean, for me, I think that good novels usually, for me at least, are novels that pose the right questions. And for me, part of the reason why this story is posing the question is because I think not only have I not found the answer, I don't even know if there's just one answer, And I think one of the things I wanted to explore is precisely that tension between society and community's expectations of women and what we need or who we are and what we want to do to be, fully realization of self. And for a lot of women, certainly for me at various points in my life, I felt as if the social expectation of me just, by virtue of my gender, of my sex, were suffocating, and therefore that's part of the question. Even in the title, the title of the book is, a question. How the one-armed sister sweeps her house? You think that the novel is going to answer the question. What I hope is that it has more of a subversive impact. I hope that by the end of the novel, you're questioning the question or the relevance of the question. Because, even in the title, it really suggests women being confined to the domestic sphere. For me, growing up, one of the things about being a woman, a good woman, you had to know how to keep your house clean. If you couldn't sweep the house, you were no good girl, right? No, I struggle with that. I think I still struggle with that, by the way, but, anyway. So, I started to question, like, why? Why is that important? Why is that a parameter for me as a woman? I might not be a good house sweeper. I might be a really good mountain climber. Why is it that I might find myself less readily accepted by or integrated into my community because my understanding of self or my expression of self did not meet this script for me as a woman? So for me, that's a question that I think needs to be posed. And my hope is that when readers, when we pick up this story and we engage with it, we ask ourselves that question too. And perhaps, sometime in the future, that will lead to change. I don't have the answers, but I'm hoping that the novel asks a good question.
Yeah, I like that, Sherry. And even as I'm thinking now about it, even in a novel, Dinah never has any more children. This is her only child, and sort of she doesn't know who she is if she's not the mother to this child. You know, like, who am I if not his mother? And I think, you know, the direction of her life after, you know, she gave up the baby, she kind of was rudderless. She's just like, okay, she doesn't know who to be or how to be. And, you know, similarly, Regina, you know, in the novel, people may say, oh, she's a slut. You know, she uses her sexual prowess to get things from men. But in her mind, she's exerting her power. But maybe another way to look at it too is she's being exploited as well. You know, so truth lies somewhere in between, somewhere and all that. But I think it's more important to at least ask the questions. Who am I and who am I becoming and why? You know, and sometimes it's not even so much the answer, but the asking and what that generates. And that's what I wanted to do in the book as well.
Thank you. On the note of asking questions, I'm opening it up to the audience. If you all have any questions, please, now's the time. Come forward and ask them.
Time fast, yeah. Wow, don't let us, come on. Don't be shy, don't be shy. These are my two friends. We'll sit up here and talk for the next 2 hours, 3 hours. Real good. You don't ask some questions.
Okay, well, yes, please.
Can you tell us, now that you're on the other side of publication?
1 second. Please.
I don't usually need a microphone to talk. I was wondering if now that you're on the other side of publishing these books, when you think about maybe editorial suggestions you were given or had to take, are there aspects of the book you would change today?
That's brilliant. That's a good one. Mine is long. You see, this book is a thick book. It's a thick book. But, Sherry? All right, let me say this. As a writer, you have to be prepared to take your editor's advice. If you don't trust the editor, it's the wrong editor, right? What I would say is, for me, I took 99% of what my editor said, because this book was about half the size at the beginning, right? And my editor was like, we need to see the character arc and the relationship arc. And my background is short story writing, which is like a sprint, and this is a marathon. So I'm like, what arc? What do you need to say arc for? So no, we need a chapter where we see this, chapters where we see that. So a lot of chapters were written based on her feedback. And so I'm saying, and I can say the book is a much stronger book because I spent the time editing, which Sharon and I have had many conversations about editing, so she knows how much I hate the editing process. Right? I love short stories because you just write it, tweak here, there, you're done. Novel, I made about like 5 or 4 rounds of major structural things, right? But what I'd also say is that you have to know your work and you have to know the things to push back on. Because one of the things my editor said was, I have some bad guy characters who would do a robbery, and she's like, well, you already have so many characters, Sharma. I think this character and this one can be merged, you know, make them one person. But I'm like, no, I know the psychology of these two people. One is a sociopath, this person is not. You can't merge the two, it just can't. And in that way, I got my agent to buy in, and she said, Sharma, I agree with you. So she spoke with the editor. As a writer, everything your publisher, your editor, the publishing house says, you smile and nod and say, I'll think about it, thank you. And then you go to your agent and say, no, I'm not doing it. Please let her know I'm not doing it. But again, if you have a good agent, they'll strike that balance and say, okay, I see what the editor is saying, here's a compromise. Or they, you know, that's their job. So I'll say, know your story and be true to the story. That's the key thing, be true to your story.
So when you, I think that's a really good question, and I was talking about this just recently. On the other side of the publication process, there is one thing I would change, and it really has to do with the whole question of what is politically correct. So I had a reference in my book. I can't remember how it's expressed now in the published novel, but if I had to, it's something like itinerant vendor of Asian descent. That's not what we called, nobody in Barbados in 1980 was walking around saying, oh, Mom, the itinerant vendor of Asian descent is coming down the road with the things. Should I tell you here or you not here? You got the $5 or you ain't got it? You understand? Nobody did that. And when they read the book, what was fascinating to me about the editing process is there was an editor for story and there was an editor for almost like, factual details, and there was a proofreader. So I went through all these rounds, and, it was interesting having an editor who wasn't from my part of the world, because I had things like that. No, you can't say, I don't even know if I could say it here, so I'm not gonna say it. But you can't say, you understand? You can't say that. I had people asking me, I had a scene where Aiden was barring Lala on the bicycle. Now, if I say barring Lala on the bicycle to anybody in Barbados or anything, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My editor says, Sherry, does that mean transporting her on the bar of the bicycle? I said, that's exactly what it means, but they wouldn't say that, you understand? So there were things like that, and I agree with Sharma about knowing when to push back and knowing when not to. So I had an experience where I had the tale, the folk tale, if you want to call it that appears at the beginning of the book. It wasn't there at that point in my manuscript, I'll admit that. My editor said, Sherry, I think you need to have that in a prologue. Now, creative writing 101 is, if you need a prologue, you're probably not starting the story in the right place, right? So I'm saying, well, how the editor could be telling me to have a prologue and to put my little story in it. I make it up. It was perfect where it was, And she's like, no, you have to have it as a prologue. Like Sharma said, I went to my agent, pulling out my hair. She said, well, Sherry, just try it. I tried it, and the editor was right.
Yeah.
That was the perfect place. News to me. You had to pick me up off of the floor. They're telling me time up, and I could really talk sometimes. They're so sorry. But
Now we're ready to talk, man.
But we're going to be here, right? So you can
I
find us
know.
individually and ask all the questions you want to ask. We'll answer
This
them.
is the thing, I know warming up. The last thing I will say though is that my editor told me the title was too long. I am so glad I didn't take her advice.
So y'all, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think you probably have other conversations that you need to have with these ladies after this event. And yes, it's been a joy and a pleasure to be here. Okay? Take care.